Welcome to the EQ Podcast. Welcome to the EQ Podcast, a show focused on equipping ministry leaders within the Calvary Chapel Association in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Zach Lamberson, and with me is Pastor Steve Winery. And we have on the show today one of Pastor Steve's assistant pastors and the head of security at Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities, Matt Lewis. How you doing, Matt?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. So we're going to talk security specifically for small churches, but also things obviously that large churches should be doing if they don't already have in place. And you want to just quickly give us your background. Why should we trust your knowledge about security?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't trust me. First part of security is don't trust anybody. But no, I did 10 years at the Benton County Jail. And so I have a really good overview of facility security, because we ran contracts all the way up to federal. And so basically it was a prison that housed 900 inmates, but also local, which is your community arrest coming in. And then after that, I went to Hanford Patrol. And if you don't know what that is, it's nuclear security. So out at the Hanford site, they're treated as security contractors. It's more heavily military. It's all about, obviously nuclear security. And so it's very military-esque, although still a portion of law enforcement. And so 13, 14 years, that was my background while I was doing ministry here for a long time. But that's where I came from before I came on staff here in 2020.
Okay, so one of the things you talked to me about previous to the interview was you see sometimes small churches don't really see a need for like having a security team. What would be your encouragement to like smaller-ish churches, the ones who are 50 size, maybe up to 100 that really haven't seen like, oh, I don't think we need that ministry, or I don't see, right now it being something that is a priority. What would you say to them?
Yeah, so since this is, to my understanding, going out primarily to senior pastors, one of the things I've noticed doing ministry conferences and talking to guys, and usually it's a person from the fellowship that will come up and talk to me about security, and interestingly enough, one of the roadblocks is the senior pastor. And so what I would tell those guys, and I have a couple verses here because I knew we would do this. I know they're senior pastors and they know all this stuff. But in Nehemiah, when they're building the wall, I'm going to read chapter 4, I'll start in verse 13. Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And, I have a bunch of them. I don't go through all of them. In Proverbs, in 1 Chronicles chapter 9, is a whole section of this. Ezekiel, I have on our security badges coming up, Ezekiel 3:17, be a watchman over the house of Israel. I understand that Ezekiel, being a watchman is preaching the gospel, and there's a spiritual aspect that context is in. But for the most part, I think that a lot of times pastors forget there's this whole watchman protection over God's people that's a physical thing, not just a spiritual thing. And as a shepherd, one of the duties as a shepherd is to watch for your people. And so the first thing is like we're in America, so we have this culture of just being safe. And the government that God set up, we have law enforcement that come and do all that stuff. But it's 2024. And so I'm in tune to this because of my background, and I get emails on a regular basis about what's going on. And so this last week, I had 2 church events where guys went to contact somebody, and they got cut with box cutter. One of them was a homeless guy that was on campus, took out a box cutter, slit the dude's throat, almost killed him. Some of you guys in the Calvary Chapel movement may have remember Skip Heisek's church in 2022. He had a security guard just go contact somebody in a car on their campus. And it was, I think, an after-hour situation. The dude backed into him, ran him over again, pulled his body on the side, and they found him later and killed him at Skip's church. And so it's a thing. Primarily, A lot of times, everyone goes to the active shooter thing. Yes, there are those. We have a bunch of those now on video from Texas and church shooters that come in, and that's for sure a thing in church security. But one of the things I think people forget is the watching out for kids and children's ministry. So it encompasses the major problem of sex offenders and pedophiles that come to church where people are loving and open, and so watching out for children's ministry and that whole thing that's part of the security wing. But all that to say that it starts from the top down. And so the senior pastor has to understand the world that we live in, the authority that God set up in the church to watch out and shepherd his people and protect the kids. And then, everyone knows this, but Satan doesn't fight fair. And if he can bring a sex offender into your church and have a situation goes on that makes the news, that's one of the best ways I can tell to start drama in the fellowship, and it wrecks people. And so first step is getting senior pastors to understand that this is something that they should at least consider. We were having a conversation actually yesterday at lunch, and we were talking about, maybe the naivete or that love believes all things, and sometimes we take that to a default that wrecks the people around us. So maybe you could just speak to that aspect. Oh, and by the way, he's wearing this hat because this is how you profile security, is to look for weird people dressed like this when they come in.
That's right. Look like a biker, put a beanie on your head. Actually, what was happening was I was doing some construction yesterday, and every time I do construction, I hack my head up. And I forgot to wear a baseball cap, so I don't want to show you my hacked up head. Just to the issue of the size of the church, most of the weird things that have happened in our church happened when we were smaller. And so, one of the things that I always knew about church, because I came from Greg Laurie's church, is that Satan attacks and he uses weird people to do this stuff. And so, gosh, almost, I can't say it was every service, but almost every service, because Greg was always sharing the gospel and leading people to Christ. Almost every service, there was going to be somebody who stood up and did something weird. And sometimes it was literally standing up during an altar call and screaming and yelling. And so, the pastor can't necessarily take care of that from up front, although he did a pretty good job, and that's where I learned some of my, techniques as far as dealing with people in an audience when they're going south on things like that. But you can't expect that that's not going to happen. There are places where it's going to be more prevalent, and so when you have venues that are in larger population areas, you're going to have more guys like that. But nowadays there's guys on fentanyl that are in rural areas, and people wigging out on meth and all that kind of stuff. And if Satan can use these guys, he's going to, he'll send them to church, and there'll be an issue that comes up. And so you need to have guys who know how to handle that kind of issue and do it kindly and that kind of thing. But get the guys out of the service so that you can talk to them one-on-one, or if you need to trespass them or things like that. Can't tell you how frustrating it is to be up front. You're in the middle of a service and you got a bunch of ushers who do not take care of issues in the congregation because they're embarrassed or they don't know what to do or that kind of stuff. And it just gets in the way of the gospel. And what you would like is for the guy up front not to have to deal with those things because it makes him look like a hard case. And, even with that, sometimes that's a good thing. So Matt was talking about the fact that pastors need to be protecting people. Paul, in Acts chapter 20, when he's talking to the Ephesian elders, he talked about the fact that grievous wolves are going to rise up from amongst us. And so a wolf is somebody that attacks the sheep. And it's not just spiritually. It can be in all kinds of areas, like he's talking about going after kids and that kind of thing. That's the other thing. Some of the weirdest things that we ever had happen in Sunday school happened when our church was smaller. And it's because these guys know what Christians are like, and Christians have a tendency to be naive, or they think, even if they're not naive, they think that the way that they're supposed to react to a situation is always loving, which means no confrontation, no "what are you doing here," no, things like that. And so the guy can come in and manipulate the situation. And so I actually nowadays I'm less on top of it as far as what's going on in the congregation and what's going on around here, because I don't have to deal with it, because I've got a bunch of ushers who, they may not be a radical security team, but they're trained and they're watching out for things. And that's a good thing. Another thing, if you're the pastor of a smaller church, you're going to have guys who are coming from other churches that have been kicked out of their churches. And there's reasons that they were kicked out, and so they want to go someplace else. And a lot of times pastors don't communicate with each other. And so you have to be able to, you don't need to be crazy, over the top, cynical about everybody that walks into the fellowship. Obviously, we love people, and even the people that are weird, we love them and we want them to come to Christ. But it's like, you don't want people getting hurt, and you don't want the ministry being crippled on any kind of level because you're not watching out for what's going on in a situation in church. And so you need to be aware of those things. You need to be paying attention. And spiritual warfare is spiritual warfare. And like Matt was saying, Satan doesn't fight fair. He's not polite. He's not a gentleman about these things. It's like he does whatever he can to distract from the work of the ministry. And so we need to be prepared for them.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, if you're talking to a pastor of a small church and he's wanting to implement some security protocols and, build a team up, how would you go about doing that, or just encouraging him with that?
Yeah, so again, it goes to the size of the church, but philosophy, mission, priority overall. And he was already doing this before I got on board, but I think I sent you a thing a couple weeks ago. And so for me, for church security, it goes like this: kids and the youth, so children's ministry, because they're the weakest and most vulnerable. Then your congregants, just people in general, as far as like being a protector and a warrior, it's because we love people. So our whole mission is to watch out for people who are weaker than us. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. And so that's a priority. Third one for me, and this isn't necessarily in order of importance, but the gospel. Steve just talked about that, is that the priority on Sunday morning is that the gospel is preached. So that doesn't get interrupted. And so we have people, we call them like the VIP guys that are on Pastor Steve. A quick example of that is, let's say that after church, and we have 3 services, so everyone wants to hound and talk to him after church. And so one of the things that the VIP guy who is on Steve, on the senior pastor, is preventing someone from just walking up on stage. We've had that happen, I think, twice since I've been here. Weirdos that just stand up, but after church, when everyone wants to talk to him. In fact, this happened last Sunday where he has to go and pray for somebody, and it's set up, and a bunch of people want to talk to him. Part of the security is like, "Hey, Pastor Steve, nice," and he gets to decide because he's the one that's doing the witnessing, but being a buffer from the people who want to talk to him versus the priorities of the gospel. And then witness. So one of the things that's in here is having a presence. And so your witness in security is that you care about your people by providing that service. And it goes along with the gospel in the sense of loving people and how you present that. And then the 5th one for me is liability. And so just to round that out, there are churches in Florida that I know of and guys go to, and they take security to the point of their ushers are in like tactical vests, right? With like firearms and AR mags and everything. And it's because they're in a place where that culture, it doesn't really bother people, right? There are churches that put uniformed police officers out front. And in certain places and states, Texas and stuff, that's just standard operating procedure. So as far as your witness, you're not stumbling anybody. we live in Washington. So if I put guys open carrying rifles with tactical vests out in front, people are going to freak out and it's going to stumble your witness to the gospel. And so I take the culture where you live and adjust the security accordingly for your fellowship. Yes, it's there, but you can do it in a way where you don't have to be a prison and still do the job. And then liability is just the living in the world we live, the legal risk, how you navigate that between whatever your SOP is, your policy, what the senior pastor wants and expects, and just setting yourself up for lawsuits and protecting yourself and the church specifically in that area. So
real quick, what's SOP?
Standard operating procedure.
I knew that. I don't know that everybody watching does. You guys all use acronyms for everything.
Yeah, sorry. I'll try and speak plainly.
You mentioned distractions, and we talked about how you might you don't want to have, Steve doesn't want to be the one that handles someone who's a distraction. What would you say, I think, obviously there's a different approach versus like someone who has a baby who's being a distraction versus someone who, is dressed like a chicken or a bunny, and they're causing a distraction. How would you handle those situations differently? How would you encourage guys?
Yeah, so the reason Zach says that is because we had someone show up in a bunny suit on Easter, and we had somebody show up in like a homemade chicken suit doing an African rain dance in the back of the sanctuary, and it was when Mitch was preaching. And so both of those things happened, so tongue-in-cheek there. So as far as the mothers, I like having a mother's team because I don't think it's effective to have guys, especially that look like me. I know your church, you have some cops there that have full beards. And it's not, it's hard to be loving and kind and go up to them, a guy like me, and go, your baby's crying, get out of the sanctuary. So I think it's more effective to have a women's team where you have moms contacting moms and set up that for, the baby distraction thing. And that can be a part of greeters, which are part of your ushers, part of your hospitality, part of security, which is overall your Sunday morning team. For the other guys, if somebody stands up, it's kind of like an automatic. If they're being a distraction, they should be talked to, escorted, dealt with, where he can just keep on preaching and doesn't interrupt the service. Some of that is sitting down with your senior pastor. Hey, what are your expectations? What is it that you want on a Sunday morning? Some of it, they have to know the laws in the state in which they live. Can I touch somebody? Can I escort somebody? Or what are the rules there? For the most part, this has only happened a couple times, but it's kind of, I try to be as nice and kind as possible. Hey man, how you doing? I'm Matt, nice to meet you. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? And then their actions get to decide where that goes. Usually, most of the time, they're like, yeah, sure. And the goal is to get it out of the sanctuary, into the foyer or outside, and church can just keep going on. That one chicken guy that you brought up, the thing with our church is he's being a distraction. It got to the point where he got into the service without being contacted by an usher. There's a bunch of things that go on, so that was our mistake. It was the harvest party that night, and so it was kind of like, well, is this guy showing up early type of thing, and all this stuff that got through the loops, which is kind of how it goes when that happens. But he's doing this weird thing. I don't know who he is. He's got a bag. He starts putting stuff back in his bag, and you don't know what this guy has. You don't know if he came in with something, if he has weapons, all the stuff that cops think about. So I'm watching him, and I have an usher to my left and an usher to my right. And by the time we left the sanctuary, because this is kind of our church here, I look behind me, and I have West Richland on my left, two Benton County guys behind me, and a Kennewick police officer on my right. And so they kind of know the drill. And Mitchie was preaching, went back to what he was saying, and we escorted him out of there. So some of it, you have to know beforehand what are you supposed to do, what does the senior pastor want, and then depending on the actions of the person in front of you, you go up and down depending on to adjust for the situation. And so in a nutshell, that's kind of how it goes.
Some of this stuff, I think, actually, I just think this way. And again, it's because of the church that I came from. some of the stuff you can kind of cut off at the pass just by having a presence of guys that are there. And so one of the reasons that I do an offering is specifically so that everybody in the room knows that there's guys there who are in authority. And then on top of it, if he's got guys with lanyards on who are doing the offering, then, somebody who comes in and is thinking about, causing some kind of ruckus or causing some kind of problem realizes that there's a bunch of guys here that might step up and do something. And so, then I'm fully convinced that there's probably been more people than have caused problems before that decided not to, specifically because there were so many guys around who looked like they might do something about that. And again, it's like we don't have ushers that are sitting there glaring at people. They're just there, and they're obviously guys who are in authority. And so I've always except for during COVID, we've always taken an offering, and that. Besides the fact that it talks about it in 1 Corinthians 16, that specifically is the reason that I've done that. And so I think it kind of helps out with that whole situation.
You mentioned litigation. I think that's something too that, guys are not really necessarily thinking about with their security, but you're protecting your kids, obviously, that's their priority, but you're also protecting the people from accusations. And so having security in place, having cameras, your cameras aren't necessarily there to prevent, but they are there to have, capture a record of what's going on. And so there's, even an extra measure of when law enforcement comes into the picture, if they see that you have some of these protocols in place, it's definitely going to bode better for your situation than if you have no cameras and you've got no protocols and anything could happen and you have no oversight over it, which would just be foolish. But some of those things are pretty simple to do. Security cameras, I think everyone installs them on their front door now with a Ring camera. I feel like everyone can go through and add some of these things, no matter what size church you are, make a budget for it. I know your church, my church as well, has a budget for background checks. Super simple, easy thing to do to vet everyone who comes through. And then I was also thinking, as far as insurance goes, having liability coverage for your church, for your team members, but again, not just for damage to the church facility or something, but for protection for people if someone wants to make an accusation. Then you have all these protocols. I know your insurance looks at these things as well and says, do you have these trainings in place, and do you have all these things kind of set up? If you don't, then they're less likely to go with what your issues are and try to help you out in those things. Might even lower your rates some. You mentioned active shooter things. Do you do trainings? What do you talk to your guys about in those situations? Because that's what most people think of security. They're thinking of a big, active shooter type scenario. What are the things you talk to your team about? Because I think, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be your security team. If you're at a small church, you're talking to your ushers, you're talking to your elders. What are things we are going to do if something like this happened? Because like Steve said, it's more likely to happen in a smaller church where there's less of these protocols in place.
Okay, so this is a huge conversation of content. I'll try and be brief. You mentioned children's ministry first, and that's kind of what I set out as kids and youth. And so the way we do it here, and I think it's effective, is that all our leaders go through what's called Ministry Safe. And what it is a series of videos that you watch, and it only takes 30, 40 minutes. You watch the videos, you take a little quiz at the end that anybody who breathes can pass. It's not like a hard thing. But what it does is it trains your leaders to look for things that come up in children's ministry from people who, pedophiles and people that want to manipulate and come in there. So what it does is, he already mentioned presence. When you have all your leaders trained up on this, and if you want to be in the children's ministry, you know that everyone knows and has watched these videos, it's a prevention because it's a presence. With the Ministry Safe, you get a background check, and that background check should be nationwide, not statewide, because you have people moving around. And so first approach is children's ministry, go through the Ministry Safe videos, have everyone on the same page, and background check. With that, and you're looking at protection from the kid side and the leader side. So just very simply, there should be no male leader that's privately texting a female teenager, right? You are setting yourself up for disaster. So oversight, accountability, cameras fall under there that you mentioned. I consider it evidence collection. We have a school here. I can't tell you how many times. It's like a monthly thing for sure. Sometimes, especially the start of the year, maybe a weekly thing where they're like, hey, can you check out this on the camera? And allows you to go on there. It's accountability and oversight if someone were to make an allegation. Hey, Pastor Matt said this to me, and you can get on the camera and go, no, I was standing right here in the hallway, and it kind of makes that stuff go away. We've used it for theft. We've had a couple break-ins, and yeah, you can give the video to law enforcement and go from there. So as far as like your culture of security, it should start with the simple things that nobody from a security, military, law enforcement background can do. And if your church, small-time church, doesn't have that, that's fine. You can start there and then grow your program. When you're going to the other side, which would be like an event, an active shooter, somebody come in to do harm, or there's been a lot of people coming in that walk into a church who have, are running from police officers from a convenience store robbery or whatever, and they just kind of walk into church. There's been a bunch of those lately. What I like to do is usually, even small churches, have somebody who has a law enforcement / military background. Those guys want to serve, and a lot of times with their personality, they don't know where to get plugged in at. So security / usher is like the perfect road in. So I treat it as a ministry. And so if you have somebody that has a background in that, that's a person you want to have set this up because they already kind of know what's going on. If you don't, you have guys who are civilians that take it seriously, that read up, that follow the CCW, concealed carry weapons guys, and they're up on the Second Amendment laws that are always changing. If you have one of those guys, perfect. Gold, use them and plug them in. I'm doing a security only team when we get into our new building, specifically because I have the resources. And so I have about 30 ushers now, and I'm taking another 10 guys and doing just a separate security team for this. Now, with that, I have 7 or 8 cops who are the security guys because they're already in the know, right? I don't have to train them. They know the laws. If something happens, they're at risk from all the stuff from their own job that it's like they just do what they do. If you don't have that, you want to, in fact, one of the things that I put in there when it's talking about a watchman or a guardian, a gatekeeper over the house of Israel, it has reliable man in that verse. And so if you're going to put a guy in a position, he needs to be somebody that de-escalates, okay? One of the traps is you have the military guy who treats it as like he's a bouncer, and he doesn't transition from, this is a fellowship. There are weird people coming in. I was that weird person when I first got saved. And so the job is to de-escalate, but at the same time protect the sheep. And so he needs to have the mindset of, if something happens, I can deal it and know how to do it. And that means you need to train the guys if they don't have it. But he also needs to understand that the main job is talking to people, de-escalation, talking to parents, and that type of thing. So what I do is, with my background, I have annual trainings. And so I do as many as I can. You got to remember that these guys have jobs, and so I can't do a training every Saturday and ask them to be here for free on their own dime. So I've been building it up. We have probably 4 to 6 a year. Our last one, for instance, was TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care. And all it is this. We have an AED. They got their first aid card, and we have trauma kits, and they got trained on trauma. And so we have a guy's name, I won't mention his name, but he works at Cadillac ER. His military background, and he came and did a Stop the Bleed class, which is a free thing that goes around. You probably have this in your community somewhere. They come in and they bring in first aid dummies and trauma dummies, and you walk through, and at the end you get a certificate. And so you can do that with Room clearing. If you're doing firearms, you need to have somebody that goes, this is how I want your ushers to handle it. This is, concealed carry, this type of holster. If there's an event, this is what we're going to do. Everyone all on the same page. And I could talk for hours about that. So I won't. It's a kind of a separate conversation. But in a nutshell, if something happens, you got to have all that set up. You got to have guys that can communicate, that know in a situation, this is how we're going to lock it down. This is our control. This is how parents meet up with kids. When law enforcement comes, this is how we approach them. They're coming with guns. We have guns. Like that's a bad deal. So if you have someone in your church that can take that over, and most guys that come up and talk to me, they have a passion or desire to get that going. So I know it's big. It's a huge thing. Just start small. Like, hey, we need an AED. Perfect. Your mission for that month is to get an AED and train your ushers on it. And then build that accordingly. And then what's happened here is it's become a ministry, and I use it to bring in law enforcement who are maybe flaky because of their schedule or whatever, and I incorporate ushers with security and use it as a ministry for guys that have a passion for it.
You keep using the acronym AED. You want to explain that one?
I do use acronyms a lot. Yeah, so I don't even know what that stands for. Something...
Emergency defibrillator.
Yeah. It's a really cool piece of kit that is just basically a box that goes on your wall. Every school has this. I think buses, any public place has it. And what's cool about it is when someone goes down, usually like cardiac arrest, it could be anything, seizure, they got something in their throat, they stop breathing, heart attack, whatever. You take this basically box out, and it's got 2 pads on there, and you put pads on their chest, and the computer diagnoses them. So if you need to do CPR, it tells you need to do CPR. It tells you when to do it. It tells you the rhythm to do it. It reads your chest compressions and tells you go deeper, or a lot of people don't do them deep enough. So what's cool is you can have minimal training, put these pads on them, push the button, and the computer tells you everything to do. And then if it is a cardiac arrest, which is one of the major things that health issues that emergency things on sports event, older people, cardiac arrest, heart attack, it will monitor that, and then it has the ability to do the shock. Your medical guys are going to be like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't. It does the shock that gets your rhythm back in your heart, or the science. And it's probably the number one life-saving tool that we have in 2024. And you can get grants for these. So for churches, there are different organizations that will help you out to get a better price. We have a nurse over in the school. She kind of set that up. I don't know what company she used, but I know that don't go online and pay like full retail. You need to look for price, and sometimes you can get grants for these for churches and schools. And since we have both, that's kind of how we did it.
On that note, I have a few lightning round questions that we're going to customize to you and what we're doing. And you mentioned the AED. What would you say is the most important security tool? That if you're going to give your team one tool, what would it be?
Awareness. So the ability to see what's going on and potentially act before it happens. And so, an active shooter that can be stopped in the parking lot is way, way better than inside the sanctuary. And so part of having a team, with the ability to communicate, AKA radios, is so that if something happens, we can address it and deal with the problem immediately. And so most of that is a mindset with an awareness of your job is to look out for things and deal with them. And, the active shooter thing is definitely a possibility. That's why we have it. But it's like 0.00001%, right? Most of it is the children's ministry thing that we talked about, the weirdos coming in. A lot of it, that I've seen is like inappropriateness, or a dude that's trying to go after women, type of thing, and he doesn't know how to talk to them, and he's a weirdo. You can have people that come in and steal. We've had sound equipment taken and different things. And so, yeah, it's a awareness mindset, because everything trickles down from that starting point.
What about junior high girls when they go off the handle and they try to beat you up?
That did happen. It actually was from another pastor.
Got beat up by a girl.
Yeah. That's going to take too long to diagnose. But the craziest thing that happened to me was that a middle schooler who was part of a pastor, he was, I think it was his niece, and he was jumping into a situation to help her out. Long story short, she ended up just swinging it on me in children's ministry. And so I had to kind of restrain her, and then she ended up walking out of children's ministry into the sanctuary, and so it got worse. Lesson learned there. And then the cops got called because of an event, and then they had to take a picture because she scratched me and, assaulted me. And then once you have ushers that find that out, it's like for the next 2 months, Matt got beat up by a girl, and are you sure you don't want to have a second person with you to go talk to that teenager? And the ministry of ridicule went on from there.
Yes, that's why I brought it up.
So good.
I was wondering, one of the questions we usually ask in the lightning round is a good book for pastors, but is there any good resource on security that you could refer someone to if they don't have any, background?
Yeah, that's a tough one because most of it is secular. But my favorite that I would tell you is, his name's John Lovell. He has a company called Warrior Poet Society, and he's a believer. So on his website, or at least if you were to type in John Lovell Church Security or Warrior Poet Society Church Security, he actually did a YouTube series, and I think it's 9 or 10 videos, and he, from his church, kind of walks you through everything that I'm talking about and gives you ideas to think of. Now, he's going to say things that your church flat out can't do, right? So you have to take what he's saying and then apply it to your culture and your church. And so he'll say, yeah, if you can have a uniformed police officer out front, that's a good deterrent because it's the biggest presence you could get. That may not be for you, but he definitely goes through all these topics, and it's a great resource for you to kind of jot stuff down, and then in order of importance, start attacking that in your situation.
How do you spell his last name?
Lovell, Lovell.
All right, last one. One piece of advice you'd give to senior pastors regarding security, this is something that you need to know.
One piece of advice. Well, I think I already gave it in the beginning, and it's just find somebody to make it a priority. I get the fact that you have to have that person that is meant to do that, because the wrong person in that role can cause you issues and maybe be more harm than good. But if you can find somebody who is a protector mindset, who has a background, or really just a desire. There's a guy that Steve asked to do a pastor's conference breakout session, and he's a civilian, and he's perfect. He's a chaplain for local law enforcement, and he does have a background in law enforcement. But if you have somebody like that, give them a little bit of rein to build this. I think a lot of pastors just kind of hold it in a place of, well, God will protect, and I don't want to worry about it because it's going to require work. Well, if someone in your congregation is gifted in that area and can use it for a ministry, and at the same time do the things that you're supposed to be doing as a shepherd for the flock, man, let the Lord use them in that area. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's the whole, find people who love that ministry more than you do, because they'll do it better. And so that's good advice. Thanks, guys, for your time, Matt, for joining us on the show, and just continue to look forward to connecting with you. So God bless. The EQ Podcast is here as a resource for our listeners. Check us out at eqministry.com. On our website, you'll find a variety of helpful tools, including past ministry conferences and a contact form to seek out help or counsel from seasoned Calvary pastors who want to encourage you in your serving or answer your ministry-related questions. Until next time, God bless.